Hi, I'm Vincent Pasquale with FaderPro, and today we're doing a video called Audio Surgery. And what this is basically we're going to go through different drum loops and really slice them up and chop them up and break them down into their smallest pieces. And what we want to explore is really two things. First, this opens up a whole new universe for you to get creative and break things down into smaller pieces that you can make your own, create your own sounds, come up with something completely new that you can use in your productions. And also, it's a great way to learn. By studying loops, slicing them up and breaking them down, you can start to get an idea of what actual sounds and patterns make up loops that you like, that you want to explore. And from there, you can start to build your own and create your own based on some of the things you learn by slicing these up. And really, there's two examples that I think of when I think about this type of slicing and looking at complex drum patterns, and that is a marching band and a Brazilian samba drum group. And in both of those examples, sometimes there's hundreds of people together making these big, powerful, complex grooves and drum patterns. But really, it's just a bunch of little pieces and small, tiny patterns that are all on top of each other that come together to make that pattern. So as we dive into this, we're going to start to pay attention. As we slice them up, we'll see little sounds that happen sporadically, and then the culmination of all those sounds together are what makes that cool loop. So you can start to get an idea. Once you start to pull out your favorite ones and cutting them up, you really learn what things you like that you can then again use in your own productions. Now, we're going to be using sounds today from the Toolroom Trademark Series loop and sample pack, and that's Ben Remembers Drums and Grooves. And Ben Remember is becoming very well known for his drum grooves and productions, and he's created this loop and sample pack with Toolroom, so you definitely want to check that out. And he also did a masterclass for us at FaderPro for a drum masterclass, really. And really, it's a phenomenal course, so if you haven't checked that out, you definitely want to check that out too. But today, we're going to be taking some of the loops from that and breaking them down for two reasons. One, to study them, to see what really makes them up, and then also to see what pieces we can use to go off in totally new directions and create our own signature sounds. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so I'm inside Logic. I've navigated to the folder here where I've got the Toolroom Trademark Series, Ben Remembers Drums, and here's the folders inside there. So I'm just gonna go through and find some sounds. So we're gonna go into the drum loops one and just kind of audition a few of these. Now for the case of this example of what I wanna do today, I'm gonna look at the full ones because those are kind of the full loops. Obviously, there's a lot of cool ones in here. All right, so let's just grab this one. So I'm gonna pull it in here. Now, the beautiful thing about, obviously, a professional sample pack is it's gonna tell us the tempo. Now, inside Logic, if I set up a 2-bar loop, obviously we can tell that that's off, but in the name, you see here 123, so in this case, it's super easy to get that into time. We'll just change the tempo. So there's the loop. So there's a lot going on, a lot of heavy parts, and you can just see from the transients, there's a lot of hits in there. So first thing we're gonna do is start to slice this up. Now, there's many ways that you can do this. In Logic, you can pull up the scissors and snap on the grid and cut around. One cool trick inside Logic, if you have the scissor tool up and you hold down the Option key, you can see the little plus sign comes up. So if you make a cut at, say, an 8th note, it's going to cut the whole loop at the 8th notes. If I undo that, if I do it again at the 16ths, it'll cut it at 16ths. If I do it, every half bar, it cuts it into half bars. So really quickly, that's a good way to slice up loops. But I want to dive a little bit deeper here and talk about a couple other things. So we're going to go back to the main tool. And if you go around the different sections of the region here, you can see as you pull the mouse down to the bottom, there's kind of a super tool inside Logic. Same thing in Pro Tools and a couple other DAWs. But down at the bottom, you see this crosshair, and that's the marquee tool. So if I bring up the marquee tool and I go to the left of this second transient spike, I can drop the marquee there, and then using the arrow keys, I can navigate around. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But if I go to, for example, there's a transient spike there. If I go to the next one and I hold down Shift and then hit the arrow key again, it jumps to the next transient spike. So I can use that as a way to cut up these regions. So I can literally navigate around and just slice this up based on the transients. So let me just do that real quick. I'm just going to kind of drop the marquee and then use the arrow keys to let it automatically identify these transient spikes. And we're just going to start there. Now, you may notice up here on some of these hits, it actually finds a transient spike prior to the downbeat. And I'm not really going to worry about that right now. I just want to cut this up and start experimenting with it. And I want to use the transient as a particular example. All right, so now that we've got it cut up, I'm going to double click this first one and let's take a look at the waveform here. So if I zoom in here, okay, this is now down to the sample level. So each one of these little points right here is, when you talk about sample rate and bit depth, this is as per the sample rate, which is a whole nother discussion we're not going to get into now. But basically that's as far in as you can zoom and as small as you can cut or edit in this particular sound. Now, what's important on this is you notice here there's a 0 on either side. So what this is actually the voltmeter, the energy level of the sound at that point. On the top is the left and the bottom is the right. So that's the left and right speaker. And literally these waveforms here are obviously the audio waveform. And that literally is energy that is sent out to the speakers, moving the cone, vibrating it, basically reproducing that sound. And so as you zoom in, you notice that if the waveform is off of this 0 line, this 0 volt line, that means that if you were to cut there, so if I slide this region here and let it go there, that's going to be a pretty nasty pop or a click. As you edit very deeply, you want to keep the 0 volt line in mind to avoid those pops and clicks. But I just wanted to point that out really quickly. So back up to our example. We have this sliced up. We're going to deal with the pops and clicks in a minute, but I wanted to at least show you kind of where they result from. So now, really quick, I'm just going to duplicate a few tracks. Let's just get 4 or 5 of them. And I'm going to go ahead and mute these because I want to just drag these down. And let's start to dissect this pattern. Now what I like to do is just kind of pull, based on the kick drum. The kick is obviously 4 on the floor. So we'll leave the kick and then just start pulling these pieces down onto their new tracks. Okay, now we're just listening now to this sound here, and there's a kick and a snare in there. So we can actually go a little bit deeper here. I'm just going to duplicate one more track below, and let's pull out these snare hits on the 2 and the 4. And we'll go ahead and mute those, and I'm going to select the kick drum here and just duplicate that over and try to just recreate that pattern. So there aren't really many nasty pops and clicks. There's obviously a hi-hat on top of the kick. That's totally fine. That's a great technique to bring out presence in the kick. Sometimes you can use very closed hi-hats to really not sound so much like a hi-hat, but more like the punch of a kick. This one's a hi-hat right on top, which is a cool pattern. And even though there's not a lot of egregious pops and clicks, I'm still going to put a little fade out on here. And in Logic, you can bring up your fade tool and just fade that out like this. But what I like to do is just select a bunch of these regions and then come in the inspector and just hit like, a small value, and that puts fades on all of them. So there's the kick. Let's hear the snare we pulled out. So it still has a ton of kick information. And again, we're just kind of studying this a little bit. So I'm going to pull up the EQ and look at the spectral analyzer. And we'll just kind of pull out some frequencies. I'll kind of pull out some of the, 350 range, sweep it up a little bit there. I'll boost kind of a little bit of the lower end of the snare. And we want to just bring out as much of the kick as we can. Not getting too precise, just a real rough little carve and scoop there. And same thing with the snare. I'll go ahead and select this and put a little fade out on it. And again, here are those pieces that we can see in the snare that actually happen slightly before the 2 and the 4 beat. There's kind of like a little pre-clap that happens, and obviously that's very cool. So we'll go ahead and leave that, and now we kind of notice what that is. So let's mute this and let's listen to the other pieces that we cut, see if we can't cut anything any further. Okay, so let me do a little fade here because you can hear those pops and clicks. Another way you can do this is you can come in to the waveform viewer and zoom in and then hit the right arrow to take you to the end, and you can see why it's popping and clicking. And you can bring this back and find the 0 volt. There's also a feature in Logic where you can snap the edit to 0 crossing. So as you move this, it'll kind of snap things to the 0 crossing. All right, so that's one way to get the pops and clicks out. But again, easiest way, just slap a fade out on there. Tons of low end going on there, so let's just scoop that out just for the heck of it. Clean that up a little bit. And then you can hear there's a little hit at the end here. And we'll just kind of make note of it, but there's one hit happening there. So let's see what this bottom piece is. Cool, so it's this kind of little double hit here. Let's do a fade out there. And there's tons of hi-hats in this pattern, so we're obviously not going to get those out, but we're just trying to see what pieces we have there. So let's zoom back out, and now that we have these pieces, we can kind of start to see, you know, what things we can start to analyze. So for example, this middle piece is kind of hi-hats that don't happen, you know, on the 2 and the 4 with the kick and the snare, basically. Here's the kick. So that has that ride symbol over top of it. Here's the snare, which has hi-hats more open like these ones below. There's the hi-hat we just looked at, and then these little percussive hits. And it sounds like there's another little piece, and if we zoom in here, we can see this little hit here. So we can pull up the scissors, and it'll start to obviously cut into the sound of that previous hit, but there is another little sound there. So let's just listen to that guy. Yeah, so there's a tiny little hit there too. Cool, and it obviously cuts there, but again, we're just taking a look here at the different pieces. So this is kind of a good example with this little piece right here of one little sound that happens at that one time to contribute to that more complex pattern. So let's kind of unmute everything and listen to the full loop again. So it sounds a lot more chopped up, but again, what we're doing here is just starting to break this down to see if we can do anything with it, not the least of which is kind of learn what it's constructed of. All right, so let's pull in another loop. This time I want to go into the bongo and tom loops folder, and let's just start to listen to a couple of these. All right, so let's pull this one in. So pull this one in, and I'm going to mute all these other tracks that we have and unmute that bongo loop and do the same thing. I'm going to kind of create a few tracks here. And let's just start slicing it up. So it kind of sounds like these 3 little hits at the beginning. And we're going to use the marquee tool again and just cut these out and drag them to their own track. So there's that pop and click again. So this time let's dive into this and see if we can't get that out. We'll bring that back to here. We've got the zero crossing on. So it's a little bit better. So again, that's one way to do that. I still like to go up here to this fade out and just add a little fade out over all these regions. So there's that sound. We've cut this sound out. So that's happening pretty consistently. And this third sound. All right, so this time I used a little fade tool here, and what's cool about that is if you bring up the fade tool, after you drop in a fade, you can drag where it starts to fade, and then if you put it a little to the right, you see this icon, then you can adjust the curve of the fade. So that's pretty cool too. And you can do that with these other ones once you do it the other way as well. So you can adjust the fades pretty easily. So we'll just kind of curve that out a little bit. And then let's listen to this last sound. So 2 little hits there, and again, we've got kind of 4 pieces here. So let's take these all out and listen to the full loop again. Cool, so that's a great example of, first of all, kind of learning what sounds construct that loop, but now these pieces are a little bit cleaner than the loop we had before. So, maybe we can use these in our own way, maybe just use parts of it, or we can rearrange them. And maybe just use parts of it. So for example, if we turn the kick back on, so then, you can see as you start to play around with these, now we've got a bunch of pieces to work with. And, what we can also do is then start to jump off into our own direction. So we can bring up an instrument. For example, we can bring up an Ultra Beat, which is Logic's drum machine. And I'm just gonna pull up their factory Boutique 909 kit, and we'll pull to a blank sequence and go over here to full view. I'm just gonna add a kick to every downbeat, turn the sequencer on. So that has those 2 sounds. There's just the 1 sound. So there you can easily see how we now have these pieces and we can really start to get creative with it. Let's pull up the Ultra Beat again, and I'm just gonna add a quick little closed hi-hat. We'll put that on every upbeat. And what's cool here is, let's mute this guy. Now we have these slices, we can obviously start creating our own patterns. We can add and change these. So we can kind of copy this one over here. All right, so hopefully you can see how powerful that can be, both by studying your favorite loops and also breaking them down to then go off in totally new directions for your own productions. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll see you again soon.